Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Newcastle University alumni event in support of social justice. Today, we will be screening the film, Who is Europe? And I'm going to, in a few moments, ask Professor Chris Whitehead and Dr. Ian McDonald to introduce themselves, who are the panel members. But first, my name is Judith Rankin, and I'm Newcastle University's Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and also Professor of Maternal and Child Health. The format for this event is that following introductions, we will roll the film, and then we invite you to ask questions of both Chris and Ian. So first, Professor Chris Whitehead, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'll say a little bit about where this film, Who is Europe, has actually come from. So the film comes from a project that ran from 2015 to 2018, led by Newcastle University, which was funded by the European Commission. And this was called the Critical Heritages of Europe project, or CoHERE project. It ran through about 12 different organizations, obviously with Newcastle as the leader and myself as the coordinator. And there were about 60 staff in total, and it was a 2.5 million euro project. And it was really about conducting research into the relationships between a particular moment of European and European Union politics and heritage and people's senses of identities. So just to frame it a little bit, I mean, when we think about heritage, we might usually think about something that's a good thing, something that we can be proud of and that can bind us all together. And I think at that particular time when we ran the project, the EU was thinking in that way too. They saw it as a political resource for overcoming certain kinds of crises and in fostering a sense of collective belonging to Europe. And obviously in the middle of the project, one of the things that happened was Brexit. So it immediately shows the kinds of fault lines and difficulties with this project, the European project. So the CoHERE project was about the kind of the liabilities of an idealist approach. And the main argument was that in order for us to be a community in Europe, it's first necessary to recognize division and different and sometimes contested ideas about what Europe is, what it has been in the past, and who belongs there. And that's where the title, Who is Europe, actually comes from, in a sense. So in many ways, the film is about the relationships between heritage and histories and belonging, and the possibilities, the unequal possibilities that people perhaps have for belonging. So in the project, we wrote books, as we normally do as academics. We advised policymakers, but we also wanted to work through different channels and reach different audiences, and also use the potentials of different media. And that's the idea of where working with Ian came in. I think of Ian as a brilliant documentary filmmaker. And the great thing about Ian for this project is that he's got a really extraordinary kind of deep sensibility to social and political issues. And that was exactly what we were dealing with. And he also uses film as a kind of provocation, and that also fitted very well with our project, which was intended as a kind of constructive provocation to the EU in terms of how it should think about European past and how it should frame heritage policy. Lastly, I'd say there was no template for the film. We didn't have a kind of idea about how it would be at the beginning, so it found its form as we went on, or Ian found its form. And so now I think that's probably the time, with that kind of framing, now that I've said something about the ground from which this film sprang, that I should pass over to Ian, and he can talk about the film itself.
Thank you very much, Chris. So Ian, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Judith, and thanks, Chris, for framing the film within the project. Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things, because I think I'd rather leave maximum time for discussion at the end, and Chris has framed it very, very well. I just want to say three things. One is that, and pick up where Chris left off, which is about my relationship to the project. I had the good fortune to be working with people like Chris and Susanna Eckersley and all of the other people involved in the project, who basically were open to taking the risks of allowing me to sort of respond to to the research project in the way that I saw fit as a filmmaker that was interested in social political issues, that they were happy to be challenged, happy to allow me to present them with in some ways, a kind of a personal take on how I saw their research activities, their research questions. So it was, in some ways, I saw myself as a kind of filmmaker in residence responding to the academic research, as opposed to in the way that I kind of resisted and fortunately this was accepted by colleagues in CoHERE, that I didn't want to see, and I didn't think it would benefit their research, particularly to see me as a filmmaker that was coming in to disseminate the findings of their research. So I think that was it. They accepted a very different model of the relationship between filmmaker and academic research, and Who is Europe is very much the product of that. Secondly, for me, form is almost as important as content. How you shoot, how you present the footage, I think is almost as important as what you are showing. And you'll see with this film, there's a very distinctive approach that I use the split screen as a way in which to present the footage. And I'd be interested to see, what you make of that, how you respond to that, whether that you think enhances, makes sense, makes it more complicated. But obviously that's a key feature of this film is the split screen aesthetic. And then finally, the film is in a series of acts. So the full film is a film in 6 acts, which covers the 6 kind of big work packages, the big research groupings that formed CoHERE. And it was designed so that the 6 acts are essentially like 6 short films that hopefully cohere as one film in a cumulative way, so that as one film kind of builds on the other film and speaks to the other film, so it feels like a coherent film. But also we were keen that you could use the acts as short films in and of themselves. So they stand up hopefully as films in and of themselves, but also they work together as a single film. So the version that we're going to be presenting here is a film in 4 acts, which I think has a more tighter focus around the themes of this Day of Action around race, religion, and migration. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I look forward to the discussion with you in approximately 40 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I would just like to say that this film has already been shown at a number of film festivals and academic conferences right across the world, and was the Audience Award winner at the Refugees Film Festival in Berlin and shortlisted for the Arts and Humanities Research Council Research Film of the Year. So I think with that introduction, we should move straight on to showing the film, because clearly it's a very powerful film. So I'd invite you to start the film, but I'd also invite you to think of questions and maybe start posting your questions on the Q&A, which we'll pick up once the film finishes. Thank you. So just to say, there's a link in the chat. So if you click on it, you will be able to follow the film, and then we'll come back to this screen for the questions. So I would like to welcome everyone back. Thank you. Maybe Chris and Ian could come back on. And I think the plan is to stop sharing the slides so we can see Chris and Ian. So that was an incredibly powerful film, which really challenges views on inclusion, acceptance, tolerance, and social justice. I'd like to invite people to put their questions into the Q&A. We've already got some coming in, so thank you, but please continue to do so. Maybe in terms of your initial reactions to the film, as well as responding to Ian's request of us to comment on the split screen filming. So just to take a few of those comments already, we've got someone saying, not a question, what a brilliant film. So thank you very much for that. I'll just read this out because this is a comment. So from my dissertation on the prospect of the euro in the areas of former Czechoslovakia and the capital drawings of projects really passes over to the culture of the UK now, which would have been foreseeable at the time. There are mute considerations across businesses, revenue and funding provisions. So thank you for that comment. So I suppose in terms of, let's start the discussion. As I said, that I find that very, very powerful and challenges some of my thinking about heritage in Europe. Could we have some comments from Chris and Ian in terms of, you've given us a little bit of background to how this came about, but in terms of what the reaction has been from European leaders, I know it's been viewed by many people across Europe. Any immediate comments that have been given to you about the film from the sort of European leader side? Or policy, those who are involved in making policies?
I think Chris is probably better placed to answer that.
Sure. I'm not sure. I mean, the way the European projects work like this is, you know, the way that we tend to speak to policymakers is more through policy briefs. I would love to know how many EU or European level policymakers have actually seen this film and what they think of it. That kind of information is a little harder to get to. I think in general, when we have screened a film, there have been very, you know, divergent and different understandings of what it means. And that's partly a result of the fact that it isn't a conventional documentary with voiceovers and narration to camera and this kind of thing, which is something that we've always wanted to avoid. And I think in all of the work, certainly that I've done with colleagues in film has avoided that kind of quite didactic framing. So this is a film that can be interpreted in multiple ways and has been. You know, as an example, in one case, there was one audience member I remember worried that the ambiguities of the film, for example, in the first act around Dresden, might be taken as in some way condoning certain kinds of politics, like the right-wing celebrations or commemorations of the Dresden bombing. So that kind of ambiguity is there, and it's a liability of this kind of filmmaking, I think, that you need to sort of deal with. On the other hand, other people, other audiences have interpreted it in entirely opposite ways. So we do have that kind of sense of space for interpretation, but also you know, that is fundamentally about provocation, and it also kind of respects what I like to think of as the weight of the past in the present. You know, so there is that kind of tension and contested nature in the film, and that's also sometimes represented in the split screen format itself. And there are moments of conflict and tension in the film, not just in the Dresden act, also in the Melilla act as well, where we see sorts of dissonances. So I think that's a positive thing in a way, and that's exactly what we were trying to do, is show that we cannot have a seamless representation of a European heritage, and that there are these sorts of trouble spots that we need to face.
Thank you, Chris. And maybe one for you, Ian, is around the fact that you, as two white males from England, the UK, and what you thought that brought to it, and what you thought that might actually challenge as well in the interpretation of the filmmaking and the approach that you took in.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, Judith. Could you just clarify that?
So I'm just in terms of either the way you've approached it,
yeah,
the reactions. You're not from some of the communities that we discussed in the countries.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if that angle has it been viewed by others, or was it a particular approach that you wanted and you saw the benefits of doing that? Just some comments about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the film. I mean, first of all, I think just finishing on Chris's point, it's absolutely right that, you know, we try to avoid film as a form of illustrated lecture. It needs to provide a space where people can think, talk, argue, discuss, come to different points of view. So the film, in that sense, is a provocation, and it's set up to be so. And then, of course, the other element of this is, and this is a key question within documentary practice at the moment, is, you know, who gets to tell the stories of these communities that are often excluded, particularly from mainstream media. And I take that very, very seriously, and I saw my job really to weigh up so that when I'm with communities that have less resources, less power, or are more demonized or are more excluded, I was very consciously giving more control in the filmmaking process over to them. So, for example, with the Tompa Act, you know, when I'm at the borders with the guards, you know, they are obviously in a position of power. I'm in a position of weakness, but I draw on the resources that I have to try and get through that situation. But I think my role, I'm kind of in control as well. I'm never really losing control, and I'm able to present that story in a way that it's difficult to come away with an understanding of those two individuals, the German nationalists who prefer to live in Hungary to escape, you know, Germany. It's hard to come away from that film and from seeing the fence in any other way than as a division, as a way of maintaining division, as a way of signaling hostility to desperate migrants or refugees coming into Europe for a better life. So there is an element of, even though there's no voiceover, I am very consciously constructing those images and presenting those interviews in ways that I think leads to a particular political conclusion. Compare that to Melilla, where I was very conscious that here, you know, you come into every situation already determined by history, by the media, and you can. So I'm with young Muslim men who I know have been demonized and are presented in a particular way. And I'm not there to give the other story, but to show the reality of life for them, and in a sense, just to give them. I mean, towards the end of the film, I'm kind of just giving them space to vent their rage at us, which is, you know, and it becomes quite chaotic. And then at some point, in a kind, you know, there is some subtitles that come in, which isn't what they're saying, but it's a kind of reassertion of power from the official, from officialdom, where we get text that says that Melilla is rich in colonial heritage and it's now Europe, you know, it has European status, the city of sport, etc., etc. So it's about the play of power, but I'm very conscious that how using my whiteness, my Britishness, my maleness, in a way that can give a platform to those who are excluded from the media, but also to sort of confront the powerful in ways that present them, you know, so they can present them in a particular way. So, you know, it's always tricky, and it's the same with this discussion here. You know, we desperately try to get somebody from the film, a migrant from Morocco who's in the film, to come and join us on the panel. There were initially he had agreed, but then I think after some reflection decided that it wouldn't be appropriate. He felt maybe he would be putting himself in a vulnerable situation. Of course, we have to respect that. So you end up with two white blokes, you know, talking again, and we're very conscious of that. And as I say, that what we can do, you know, is reflect on it, and also to try and use the resources and the privilege that it gives us to provide a platform, or to others who don't have that privilege, or to deconstructs and critique relations of power, not in a crude propagandistic way, but in a way that presents it to people, that invites discussion. I think that's what we tried to do.
Thank you. And I think that's certainly what the film does. It does invite discussion. So Chris, I didn't know whether maybe you wanted to come in and follow up on that point as well.
Yeah, to an extent. I think, you know, as I said at the beginning, we didn't have a template for this. We didn't even know which sites, which places in the world the film would be shot in, and so this is very much a kind of evolution that went hand in hand with some of the research that was going on alongside it, connected really to this idea of troubling or problematizing an imaginary of Europe that's shored up by its backstory, or in other words, the European history and heritage, that is kind of monocultural, or, you know, if it's multicultural, then it is multicultural within a particular kind of political framing of, you know, solidarity and collectivism. And I think what we were trying to explore, both in the kind of conventional research and the film, were the fault lines within this kind of discourse, not with a view to sort of saying, okay, the whole European project is nonsense and should be scrapped. I mean, people can think that if they want, but that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was really to produce a greater sense of equal and collective care, or a better and more appropriate, more proper model of care that reflects divisions, dissensus, tension, conflict, and doesn't shy away from that in favor of some kind of mythical harmony, because that doesn't seem to me to be the way to develop any kind of progressive geopolitical or, you know, or indeed kind of political demos. So that's really the kind of thinking behind that. Sorry, that was a bit garbled, but I hope you get the idea.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's great, Chris. So I'm just going to go back to, we've got some comments and questions coming in. So we've got a comment. Thanks so much, an excellent film that shows all the contradictions of European societies and reveals the reality, which demonstrates the roots of their heritage and hypocrisy of political discourse in Europe. So that's the comment. And we have a question that's come in. Sorry, I'm just trying to move up so I can see it. In the Brexit debates, the discussion of migrants has changed from people coming into Europe to people from less wealthy European countries coming to the UK. And it seems that now we're more interested in who isn't white and who isn't British more than who isn't European. So this person who is interested to hear what the panelists think about this and how they see discussions of migration changing post-Brexit in the UK. So I don't know if either of you want to take that one.
I would, sorry, Judith, all I would say is that some of the more absurd claims about Brexit that were made at the time are kind of both around migration, but also around the economy and the payoff for the NHS. All of those claims that were made to try and to swing the debate are kind of all unraveling at the moment, and it's especially around the question of you know, migrants and refugees coming here, the extent to which our economy, our society is utterly dependent upon labour from abroad has been kind of utterly exposed. And so we now are in this ridiculous situation where we know that there are shortages due to and they're scrambling around now trying to get visas for foreign workers. So yes, it has changed the debate. Things have moved on, you know, and in some ways now it's, you know, I watched Priti Patel's speech at the Tory party conference and was quite horrified. I know it's to the gallery. I understand the audience there, but you know, this is something now that questions of social justice and internationalism, you know, are kind of these issues are more important, I think, for us post-Brexit than they were before.
As you say, very, very live issues as we speak, aren't they? Chris, can I bring you in to that?
Yeah,
one?
sure. I mean, I think, you know, I'm as a heritage scholar, I often kind of take the long view, and I find that a very useful perspective. And by long view, I think, I mean, the really, really long view, when we think about, you know, the shape of Europe, or even that there is such a thing called Europe with that name. But you know, when we can go really long, and we can think about when it was actually geologically and geographically a different shape, with land bridges that mean that the actual configuration of land masses and seas was different. And obviously then you've got the introduction of, you know, a nation state system, a nation state geopolitical world order, and the bordering, sometimes hard bordering that creates, which is often a sort of arbitrary or semi-arbitrary kind of political cutting of the world. And that's how I see it. And I think that's why the border element chapter of the film is really interesting, because it kind of brings up that act of bordering, and how, you know, how territory is somehow policed and divided, and what that means for mobilities and for people. So I think, you know, with the question about, you know, migration and so on, I mean, migration and illegal migration, it's only illegal because there are certain structures that have been imposed upon on the world in pursuit of particular political projects. Those political projects are more or less arbitrary. Of course, they have their histories and so on, but if we take a longer view, then, you know, we see the ways in which history and politics are entwined, and also we can start to question and critique those kinds of world orders and what it means to be and what it means to belong. So whether it's, you know, Eastern Europeans coming to the UK, or whether it's North African Muslim men trying to get into Europe, we need to think about the fact that those, you know, the divisions between their starting and end points, the divisions between the countries are historically contingent ones. And we also need to think about the fact that it doesn't, you know, it's all about essentially the making of difference and the making of in-groups and out-groups. So I think that's one of the things that we're trying to sort of represent both in the project and in the film. And what are the iniquitous effects of that making of difference, because it's part of our political world.
Thank you very much, Chris. So you, in your previous answer, you started to talk about how the selection of the sites had evolved. And you've also mentioned the act about the border filming, and the next question relates to that. So this questioner is wondering whether you've looked at the UK-France border in Calais, and do you feel that is a different situation, that would have been different from the Hungary-Serbia, or do you think there would have been some similarities? So I think it's a question around the selection of the sites, but also specifically considering whether that UK-France border and the situation in Calais at the moment would have had some resonance with some of the Hungary-Serbia filming. So I don't know who wants to take that one first.
Yeah, just as a quick response, and to keep it fairly brief, I think for me, in some ways, I was looking for sites that were perhaps not as well known or not so obvious, maybe to a UK audience anyway, and in the way that the UK Calais has been and it continues to be very well covered. It's lots of journalists down there, lots of filmmakers, and I've seen a few films, you know, on the experience of people on that border. So for me, the choice of Tompa and the border between Hungary and Serbia came out of the fact that there was during the time when Orban was making a great deal of constructing this fence, and it just seemed so dystopian, but utopian to many people, constructing this fence along the whole of the border. And fence doesn't really do it justice, right? I mean, we're talking about, well, you've seen it. So I was just drawn to that, and I was just drawn to that also because this was the point at which the crisis, what was called the crisis with the migrants in 2015 kind of culminated in that first wave of migrants coming over from North Africa and coming into Europe. These scenes of them crossing, that border into Hungary and then as a gateway into Europe was very much dominating the news. So I went there in 2018, when the fence had went up and it was almost impossible to get across, and just wanted to capture the desolation of that now. And it did have a very dystopian feel. And the fact is that I wanted the fence to be, the border to be the main thing. I didn't really want the images of people kind of trying to scale or people sort of camping either side. I just wanted it to be the image. And of course, then I didn't plan. I kind of planned, but didn't plan. I wasn't quite sure. I just kind of stumbled it. I kind of knew that if I go to to film this border, that probably I would be asked questions. Wasn't quite sure what would happen. So I decided to go very early in the morning, just when the sun just came up. So it was something like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I went and used Google Map to navigate my way through the trees and the forest to where I could then see the border, and was I gasped in horror when I saw it, and I thought, and then started to film it, and then was continuing. And you see it in the film. I was stopped and questioned, and then that became the film, really, the negotiation around that. But yeah, so I think all of the kind of surrealness of it, the absurdity of it, the picturesque, nature of it was possible in a place like Hungary, in Tompa. Who's heard of Tompa? This border, this small, can't call it a town, this place, in between, on the edge of Hungary and the gateway to Serbia. Who's heard of that? And I stayed there for 3 days, and then I just had to leave after. I planned to stay there for 4 days, but I couldn't because it was just too stressful. I was becoming known, and I just left early and got a taxi straight to Budapest and got a flight out. So so that's just a bit of background behind it, the experience of it, and there's many other tales I could tell around that experience. But I think it was a combination of political plus filmmaking judgments that led me to Tompa, rather than perhaps a more obvious choice of UK, Calais.
I think I would also, I should just point out that Melilla is also that, the chapter in Melilla is also about a border, which is, the bordering of North Africa from Europe, of Morocco from Spain. And that goes back to my previous point, because that's actually, that's straight. It's not very big. In fact, I think it's about 20 miles between North Africa and the Spanish coast. You can do a day trip between the two, and many tourists do, which is quite an interesting thing in itself, because we actually kind of from Europe travel freely to North America, but obviously the young North African men trying to get to Spain have a very different limitation on their mobility. But the long historical view there shows you that this strait has always been crossed, it's always been traversed. There's been historical mixing of cultures. There's an extraordinary Islamic heritage in Andalusia in Spain, all of which now has hardened into a situation of extraordinary difference and policed difference in pursuit of essentially a kind of bordered Europe, which is impenetrable in the ways that it has been, in the ways that it could have been penetrated historically. So this is another example of a kind of world making that we see in that particular context. So for many people, they can watch the film and say, well, where's the heritage in this film? And it's not about heritage site in the strict sense of Stonehenge or a place that you go to, you pay to visit on a weekend or something like that. It's about the resonance of the past in the present, and what that means for the making of the world and for the making of the politics with which and in which we live.
I can't believe the time. We're almost at the end of our time, but I would like to, and there are many more questions I'd love to ask about the impact the film's had on you as individuals, and to pick up Ian's point about looking at the split screens and how that has added to what that brought to the film. But it would be remiss of me not to ask, as the last question, what are the next steps for this film or for this work that you're doing? Maybe you could share that with those who are with us this morning.
Well, just very quickly, the film is out there. It's available for people to see, and it's had its festival run, which is a very different audience to from the one that obviously that is probably watching today, and that might be interested in heritage. So the film festival audience are basically people who are interested in documentary and the issues. So it's completed that, and it got well received. And now, yeah, we're just interested in using it wherever to continue the discussions around both the social justice issues in Europe and the UK, but also I think, as Chris ended on there, to kind of complicate and advance our understanding of heritage and move that debate on. And so it would be great to sort of, for me as a filmmaker, I never thought I would end up making heritage films, but if this is heritage films, then I'm in. You know, this is about today. It's about you know, it's about how the past is used to sort of justify things that are happening today, which ought not to be happening, and ultimately it's about different futures, possible futures. So yeah, I'm hoping to be involved in any project that engages with that.
Thank you, Ian. And Chris, any final words?
Well, I can't put it better than that. I mean, so I probably wouldn't add to it, except to say that, you know, we are in the process of trying to apply for further funding to do more work of this kind, not just at the European level, but at a global level as well. So I hope, you know, we just have to keep our fingers crossed for that. And if the audience could do so, then that would be great too.
Thank you both very much. And there was a final comment there about how interesting the different perspectives the audience are finding, the different perspectives as shown by the film. So I think we're going to put up another slide. We are indeed, with some further resources. So if anybody wants to scan the QR codes, then they'll be able to get those further resources. And Lucy has put the link in the chat for a web link for further resources as well. So I think I would just like to end by very sincerely thanking both Professor Chris Whitehead and Dr. Ian McDonald for their time this morning and for all the work they've done in a film which I've found very powerful and has made me think a huge amount. And I'm sure the audience this morning has felt the same. So thank you all very much. And thank you to all those who've joined us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed this alumni event.